Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's PMI Friday webinar. Lean Six Sigma, I knew I'd do that. Two sides of the same coin. I'm going to restart. It's a great day this afternoon. The first snow of winter started to fall and I'm screwing up my lines. Lean and Six Sigma, two sides of the same call with Des Kelly and myself, Rich Seddon. I'll be facilitating and fluffing today's session, which includes running the Q&A desk, which we'll be using throughout the presentation. The Q&A and chat buttons can be found in your Zoom control panel. Please do keep your questions, comments, and observations coming, and I'll put them to Des as we go forward. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll send you a link via email early next week to the full recording of both the audio and the presentation. As usual, we're broadcasting live on Facebook and LinkedIn. So to those joining us on the live streams, welcome. Great to have you with us. To participate in polls, receive the recordings via email and make suggestions for future topics, please do register at pmi.co.uk/webinars. Finally from me, before we get underway, we'll be sending all registered participants a short voice of the customer survey as usual. I'd be really grateful for your feedback and suggestions for future topics for the PMI Friday webinar series that you'd like us to cover. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Des.
Thanks very much, Rich. Welcome everybody from wherever you are in the world. I hope it's warmer than it is here in the UK, but you're very welcome. And it's great to see so many people rejoining us again, and also nice to see some new faces on the list as well, or some new names on the list. So what are we going to be covering during this afternoon? So what we shall be doing is looking at some history for context, a brief view on Lean, and a very brief view of Six Sigma. And then having done that, there'll be some reflections. As I'm going through this afternoon, if you could help me, it would be of great assistance if you could populate in the chat box or in the Q&As any of your reflections, any questions, any observations you may make. Please drop them into either the questions and answers or into the chat line. Be absolutely fine. So that's what we're going to be looking at. So let's have a look at some history first about Lean and Six Sigma. First of all, I'm just going to cover off, actually, there are so many different approaches out there today. We've got Six Sigma, as many of you will know. We're going to have this thing which is called Kaizen, and we could also have Design for Six Sigma, or DFSS. Some of you may be familiar with TPM, Total Productive Management. That's a technique as well. Those of you that are of a certain age will remember the days of total quality management. In fact, in many areas of the world, still a very, very strong themed activity. And then, of course, up in that left-hand corner, the thing called Lean. And of course, there are more, and we could look at many of them. But if we take a look at some history behind Lean and Six Sigma, I'm going to take you back to 1890. And there was a gentleman by the name of Frederick Winslow Taylor. And he was effectively, or is known as, the father of scientific management. And he brought about, through his scientific management, this concept of time management. And Taylor helped in those days to instill an obsession, and this is how it's written, an obsession with time, order, productivity, and efficiency that marks the age. Now, that was back in the early 1900s. And so that sounds very similar to some of the things we do today. I'm going to touch on Taylor again a little bit in a few moments' time, but then followed on Henry Ford. Now, Henry Ford, he was and is marked as being the creator of flow production, the very first person to actually want to get production lines working. And he had this very strong desire also to not only to have flow, but to have interchangeability between parts. So each car had to be pretty much the same, whereas previously they'd always been craftsman made. These now had to have a degree of precision. They had to be the same. I should be able to take a part off one car and fit it to another. That was Henry Ford back in 1914. If we go forward a few years, we can tag into Walter Shewhart. Now, Walter Shewhart, he started his research at the Western Electrical Co. And one of the great things about Walter Shewhart was he was a statistician, and he was looking at how to improve the carbon works that they were working on. And he recognized back in those days that to understand the process, he was using data from the process. He also at that point pointed out that very rarely does data that comes from a production process ever satisfy normal distribution. So he set about trying to find a method by which he could analyze the data, and by which came control charts. He also is the author or creator of the cycle Plan, Do, Check, Act. So frequently that is assigned or accredited to W. Edwards Deming, but it was actually Walter Shewhart who created it. So that was in about the 1926. If we bounce forward a few years, and we can then pick up where W. Edwards Deming came in. Now Deming, and along with many other of the management lead consultants at those times, worked with Walter Shewhart, was obviously very key and understood much of the modern technology that was in manufacturing. But he created his methods and his models for work. And as a process of doing that, he came up with, he modified Shewhart's model of Plan, Do, Check, Act into Plan, Do, Study, Act, which is the one we use today. But he also created his theory of management. And I'm going to touch on the theory of management that he's got. We refer to it as the system of profound knowledge. Now, during the early 50s, Deming and a large group of his cohorts worked with the Toyota group in Japan, and Toyoichi Ono in particular. And it is from those relationships that Toyota built the Toyota production system. And I'm going to express a few things about that, because the Toyota production system was created around the first principles that Deming taught them in the 1950s. And those first principles came from Walter Shewhart and back even further into some other things. The one thing that Deming actually identified, though, was a particular need to work with people and to have a different regard for people. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on that in a moment. If I bounce forward now to 1985, you'll see that we start to see the emergence of Six Sigma. And the father of Six Sigma, depending on where you read, it could be any number of different people, but there was a group of them: Bill Smith, Michael Harry, and Mario Perez Wilson. They worked within Motorola, and they established the use of, or enlivened and brought into clear focus the tools and techniques of Six Sigma. But those tools and techniques of Six Sigma were farmed and understood from Deming, Shewhart, and other practitioners of the past. So that got us up to 1985. Now then, what actually happened in 1990, the book, The Machine That Changed the World, was released. And that's from Womack, Jones and Roos. Now it was that book that first brought to the world the phrase lean. The actual lean itself is accredited to a gentleman by the name of John Krafcik. Now, John Krafcik, he did a study as part of his thesis. He studied across the world 37 vehicle assembly plants, and his thesis was called A Comparative Analysis of Performance Indicators at a World Around Auto Assembly Plants. And in his 1988 paper, which was entitled The Triumph of the Lean Production System, which was published by the Slow Management Review, that's where Mr. Krafcik first coined the term lean. That reference was later used by his thesis advisor, none other than the author of, or one of the authors of The Machine That Changed the World, James Womack. And it was at that point that lean was created. I have to say, from my experience, having worked with many colleagues within Toyota, they've never used the word lean. They always use the phrase Toyota production system. So that just gives you a model of the history, and it might be quite useful. I've actually categorized these. I've put a marker in here that says this is the era of first principles. This is the era of enlightenment, and this is the era of application. So a brief history of where lean and Six Sigma came from. And if you trace it back, the genesis is the same. So I'm going to ask you to actually now participate in one of our polls. So this is a poll, which if you're with me, you can click on. So which method of improvement is most favored in your organization? Now you can select all of those that apply. So the answer 1 is we use lean methods. Answer 2 is we use Six Sigma methods. Answer 3 is we use total quality management, TQM methods. Answer 4 is we favor the use of our own in-house methods. And answer 5 is we don't have a preferred method. So Rich has, I think, clicked that poll open. And I'm sure he's going to keep it.
I can just about manage to, can't read a script, but I can operate buttons, it turns out. So polling is open. Of the questions at the moment, you're going to see everyone's hammering in with their responses. So please, this is so that Des has a sense of who he's got in the room and who's in the audience. And as Des mentioned earlier on as well, this is while you're answering that, please do use the chat function as well for any observations. As we've been doing these webinars every week, we've found people are getting quite a lot of value out of that. We can't guarantee we can get to everything, but certainly in the summary at the end, I'll consolidate that up as well. So thank you very much. I'm going to close out polling now. Thank you everyone who's responded. So I shall share the results. And what have we got? In the lead just about, so we've got pretty even split between lean methods and Six Sigma methods. As you perhaps would expect, Des, and I'm interested in your reflections on this in a moment, TQM sitting down the bottom there with the least respondents on there. In-house methods, that's an interesting one. Several respondents on that at 19%. And then we don't have a preferred method as 14%. So thoughts on that then, Des?
Well, I don't think I'm particularly surprised. And particularly about total quality management, because it's going to be quite an interesting thing. And I'll probably close reflections on that towards the end. If you remind me, Rich, I'll close my reflections on that towards the end. Because one of the things I will make an observation of is that for those who are practitioners of total quality management, many of the concepts, philosophies, thought processes that are prevalent in Lean and both Six Sigma were first initiated in TQM. But TQM gets a lot of bad press because TQM was a big thing in the 1980s. And I'm afraid many organizations presented it more as a sales tool than actually a change of mindset, a change of behaviors, and a change of principles.
Yeah, and there's something in the geography that we need to be aware of here as well with our participants because of the time of day we operate this. I would expect we don't get many kind of Asian and Far East participants in the live sessions. We tend to get European and just into the US day now as well. So TQM, particularly in regions like Japan, very, very popular even now and referred to as such. So that's probably part of the skew as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that if, as you rightly say, Rich, in Japan, for example, TQM is the predominant method, and Lean and Six Sigma would never be heard of, pretty much.
Okay.
So thank you for your votes, everybody. Again, as Rich says, keep on dropping notes into the chat or any questions that you may have. I'll be delighted to try and respond to them in a coherent way.
So slightly tongue-in-cheek one on the desk already, Jez, from a highly valued client of yours saying, did you know Frederick Wilson Taylor personally?
It's Winslow.
Winslow even, yes.
Yes. No.
Okay.
And I'm sure we would have had some very interesting conversations over a glass of whiskey. Of that I am absolutely certain. So then looking at that history, now this is one of the things I think is quite useful to think about. If you go to the far left-hand side in the era of first principles, talking of Winslow Taylor, that point, his approach or the things he needed to understand in terms of productivity, time, understanding speed, flow, those sorts of things are all things that we talk about today in our lean world. There was one significant difference, though, that I want to draw out at this point, is that Winslow believed that the system would dominate the individual. And as a result, over time, and certainly into the 1950s and 1960s, this world of industrial engineering became a place whereby someone would stand behind the worker with a stopwatch. And it created huge resentment. It created huge animosity. within workforces. And certainly for those of my colleagues who are listening to this in the United States and those who listen to it in the UK, will probably be able to remember the history. We'll have some history of how just bad industrial relations were at that time. And a lot of that was down to the fact that management timed and instructed, and the worker had to listen and do. And the reason I want to stress that is because in the world of Six Sigma, in the world of Lean, that is simply not acceptable. Workers are involved in the improvement. And the man that actually brought that about and started to actually share that knowledge with us was W. Edwards Deming himself. Now, this is the model. We're just going to go back, and this is, whilst he didn't have our shiny model that you've got there, our little nucleus type model, he didn't have that. He only had a sketch and some words on a piece of paper to talk to Giona and the group. He was encouraging them to think about their business as a system, to understand variation, right? And I'm going to focus on that because to understand variation, to develop the theory of knowledge, and to understand psychology. And he explored it like this. The purpose of understanding the system is to optimize the entire business system. And if any of you know any detail about the Toyota production system, it's entirely optimized, not only to their customer, but back through to their supply chains. Now, leadership think about their business system in an entirely different way. He taught them about understanding variation. Now, you may hear them refer to things like abnormalities. And it was from that knowledge and from that perspective that Toyota started to think. The theory of knowledge, the learning. I'm going to touch on that again in a minute. And then developing intrinsic motivation. They were things that Deming taught Toyota in the 1950s. They were things that were brought into the Toyota production system and which today have a legacy as strong as any. So Lean and Six Sigma. What is Lean and Six Sigma? So if you Google, or if you go on Wikipedia, or if you go to any research documents, I've got books and books and books on my shelves. And I can guarantee to you, all those on Six Sigma have a slightly different definition of it. So I've created two from my own knowledge, or I've just made them up, if you like. So for Lean, I'm just simply going to say it's the elimination of all forms of non-value added elements of a process as perceived by the customer. And if I look at Six Sigma, it really is the reduction of all causes of variation in all elements of a process. And you can see that they are two sides of a pyramid, not necessarily two sides of the same coin, because I understood that Rich couldn't say it right at the start of the presentation. So I bailed out and put a pyramid in. So here's the other point, which is excessive variation and non-value added features of any process are simply waste. So variation can only bring waste. And the lean concepts, which you're going to look at in a moment, they only bring waste as well. So both focus on the elimination of waste in some respects. So why does Lean need Six Sigma? Right. Well, Six Sigma has a slightly more sophisticated understanding of customer quality, what the customer actually wants. It also recognizes the two types of variation that there are. That's assignable cause and common cause variation. And for those of us that have practiced Six Sigma post the Motorola era, Six Sigma also offers a project structure, an improvement cycle for when you need to make step changes. But I want to stress that Six Sigma is not just about step change projects. It's also about the way you think about running the day-to-day. And so why does Six Sigma need Lean? Well, Lean has a better understanding of customer demand. And the Lean tools and the thinking that we have behind it is about improving velocity, that speed in the right direction, making sure that the process and the products are moving as the customer needs them. And Lean has methods to streamline processes, enabling Six Sigma quality to be able to be achieved more quickly. So what is now? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through what is Lean and what is Six Sigma. And remember, keep the chat coming in if you can do. There's some, I can see some chat things coming up. So keep the questions coming in. I'll stop in a brief while and take any questions you've got. So what is Lean? Well, I think most of you know what Lean is. That's why you're on here. So I only want to do this as a little bit of positioning, right? really lean is about the search for value added. And I think most of us will know that in our world today, we can probably categorize some categories of our processes. We have pure waste or non-value added. We have things like business non-value added. Business non-value added would be things like legislative documents you have to fill in. They don't add any value to the customer, but you have to do it. You can't operate without it. And then on the right-hand side, we've got pure value added. And a number of research studies over the last 30 years don't seem to say much different, actually. But when you move into organizations that have not been practicing any of the techniques that we're talking about today, is that you'll find that value added is probably as low as between, shall we say, 5 and 10% in many organizations. You'll have some business non-value added, which will be nominally about 10 to 15%, which leaves us with somewhere between 75 and 85% of the work done is purely non-value added. And the purpose of lean is to go in search of the value added, to remove the non-value added, so that we can increase speed, flow, efficiency, and effectiveness. And for those of you that have been around for a long time, you may remember when initially we were taught by Toyota, there were actually only 7 wastes, and they were motion, waiting, inventory, defects, transportation, overproduction, and overprocessing. And all of those equaled waste. And then we had the acronym, if you like, that came about as a result of that. And there'll be some on here, I'm absolutely sure, will be brought back to this, the thing that was called Tim Wood. Tim Wood was the acronym that allowed us to understand the order of which these things are on. If you move forward, maybe 25, 30 years, in the spirit of continual improvement, we've added another waste in it. And actually, there's some value in doing this. So we still have motion, waiting, inventory, defects, transportation, overproduction. We've changed over-processing to excessive processing. And the last one we have now in is not utilizing talents. And all of those are wastes. And now if we would like to create the new acronym, it is this. Now, actually, at first I was uncertain about this, but now today I actually think this is a really good one to use. And the reason I think it's a good one to use is because the waste that is the first you see is the one that's called defects. Now, defects are the most insidious and dangerous of the waste that we will get. And it is those that at all costs we have to prevent first. All the other things the customer may never see, but defects, they certainly will. And that's one of the things that we have to actually eliminate. So again, going into some of the key tools that we have in Lean, it's going to be things like value propositions. We're going to have the SIPOC, the flow charts, the value stream maps, the data collection when we're trying to identify where value is. We'll be looking at flow, making sure that there's no overburden and that there's a limited waste and balance is correct. We'll be wanting to ensure that we move from push to pull. So we're going to be using takt time and understanding the rhythm of what we need to have in order to satisfy customer demand. Then we're looking for perfection. And for imperfection, we're going to be using things like SOPs and standardization. Standardization, absolutely key to the art of Lean. And we're using other tools and techniques like 5S and visual management. And if you're lucky, some control charts. And I see that Rich has popped up with no doubt some questions at this point.
Hi, Des. Yeah, just a one of clarification at this point. I wonder if you could elaborate. I've had a couple of questions in around your definition of value when you're talking and customer value, specifically on point 1 here on this model. Can you just elaborate your definition of what's included within that word value?
Well, I mean, the thing is that what's the easiest way of communicating this? What would the customer really be happy to pay for? What do they value about the product that you're creating? So the fact that something had to move to 3 different countries of the world and increase the cost of the product, would you write that on an invoice? Would the customer value that? I don't think they would. And there are other features that customers will value as well. So, you know, the fact that the product has good primary quality and is reliable And those are all things that we're trying to actually understand. What does the customer value and how do we bring that about? I don't know whether that answers the question, Rich.
Thanks, Des. Yes, it does.
All right, so the camera's gone. Good. Okay. So those are the tools that you can have. And I know that there are those on here who are looking at this and saying, but Des, you haven't talked about single minute exchange of die, you haven't talked about TPM, you haven't talked about these things. And you're right, there are lots of other tools or principles or practices that could be added into this that would embolden it somewhat. So yes, I accept that. Now, just on one point on this is that it's a very useful book. In fact, they're very useful books to read. So Jeffrey K. Leica, produced the book The Toyota Way. Now, Jeffrey had been at or worked in Toyota for 18 to 20 years or so, became very knowledgeable about it, and has subsequently written a number of books trying to communicate to organizations about what is the Toyota Way. Now, let's be extensive about this. The Toyota Way is the thing that latterly has become known as lean. So it is the Toyota Way that has become lean, and that's what was being communicated. In the Toyota Way, we have this little pyramid, and Leica refers to this as the 4P model. And you'll see this in his book, the Six Sigma Way field book, team field book. At the top, problem solving, continuous improvement and learning. And that's the Genchi Genbutsu. So that's continual organizational learning. Go see for yourself. You may hear people talk about go to Gemba, go to Gemba. Go see for yourself. Learn, see with your own eyes. Make decisions slowly by consensus, but implement the changes rapidly. So that's the first level. The next level is about people and partners. Respect, challenge, and grow them. And I'm just going to pull at that point and say, remember what one of the problems that Taylor had in his views of industrial engineering. It was management on to people. It wasn't respect of and involvement of. And I think that was the pivotal change in thinking in the 1970s and 80s that has progressed to today. Respect, challenge, and grow the people and partners you work with. So grow leaders who will live the philosophy. Respect, develop, and challenge your people and teams. Respect, challenge, and help your suppliers. So that's the people and partners bit. Now the next bit is process, and that's eliminate waste. Now this is where we become really comfortable and really familiar, because this is create flow. This is using pull systems or TAC to avoid overproduction. It's using the Yamazumi or workload balancing charts. It's the and-ons when we stop products if there's a problem. It's the standardizing the task and then continuous improvement. It's all those sort of things. It's all the good stuff, all the tools that we know that we have from Lean. And at the base of the pyramid, we have the philosophy. This is the real long-term thinking. What are we trying to think? What are we trying to get to over time? And that's the base management decisions on which long-term philosophy are predicated, and they allow decisions which may even be at the expense of short-term financial goals, taking a longer look. Now, it's interesting because Leica, from his studies, and this I have to say is predominantly in the US. So for this, so people who work in the US and are listening, and this is probably one that you're going to be aware of. His studies of companies that had been trained for over many years. So this wasn't just a couple of people being trained. It was organizations that had quite a high level of support in terms of lean thinking and the Toyota production system, or the Toyota Way. His establishment was, after a number of years, is that most of those lean companies were predominantly focused around the process element, creating flow, the tools and the techniques. And that got us to a point where he actually wrote that the problem, I believe, is that in the US, companies have embraced lean tools, but do not understand what makes them work together in a system. So I just want to leave you with that one. That's a thought. The use of the tools without understanding the philosophy and the principles behind it. That's a major problem if you're trying to deploy lean in any organization. And we'll have a little reflection shortly on Six Sigma. Here's something that came out of Leica's book, and I really was quite struck by this when I read it some years back. And this is by Fujio Chao, the president of Toyota Motor Corporation, back in 2002. And he said this, I'm going to read it out. We place the highest value on actual implementation and taking action. There are many things one doesn't understand, and therefore we ask them, why don't you just go ahead and take action? Try to do something. You realize how little you know, and you face your own failures, and you can simply correct those failures and redo it again. And at the second trial, you'll realize another mistake or another thing that you didn't like, so you can redo it again. So by constant improvements, or should I say, the improvement based on action, one can rise to a higher level of practice and knowledge. Now that was in 2002. That was 50 years after Deming taught Toyoichi Odo about this: plan, do, study, act. So it is absolutely, truly fantastic that some 50 years after being first introduced to the concept, the chairman or the president of the organization was still talking the language they were taught in days gone by. And I think that's something most organizations should try to remember. What is the legacy of the act you're doing? And of course, plan, do, study, act is part of this systems thinking model that Deming taught Toyoichi Ono and his Toyota colleagues back in those 1950s. So that's a little bit about the subject of lean and actually drawing it back to that same data point back in the 1950s. I'm going to let you read that. I think that is probably indicative of some organizations. And it's always a good thing there. That's from Scott Adams and Dilbert. If in doubt, refer to Dilbert. So what about Six Sigma? What about Six Sigma? What is Six Sigma? Well, the ingredients of Six Sigma are this. It's a genuine focus on the customer. It's data and fact-driven management. It has process focus, process management, and process improvement. It's predicated on having proactive leadership, leading the activities. We want boundaryless collaboration, and we want to drive for perfection. Driving for perfection where we can tolerate failure, but we must learn from it. And that's modified slightly and developed from another group of expert Six Sigma people, Pan, Newman, and Kavner, and that goes back to the Six Sigma Way fieldbook again. So what is Six Sigma? Six Sigma is a comprehensive and flexible system for achieving, sustaining, and maximizing business success. Six Sigma is uniquely driven by a close understanding of customer needs, the disciplined use of facts, the disciplined use of data, the correct and robust statistical analysis, and diligent attention to managing, improving, and reinventing business processes. Now, I wanted to emphasize that because many people and many organizations think that Six Sigma is purely about removing defects from products. Six Sigma can be used. It's a very robust technique for removing defects for products, but it was created to optimize the business system. So just bear that in mind as we go. And the ingredients of Six Sigma are this. Six Sigma encompasses a broad array of business best practices and skills. Some of those are advanced, but most are simple and common sense. So some of the advanced ones are going to be some of the statistics you've got. So some of the non-parametric or the parametric statistics that you're going to have, your t-tests, your chi-squareds, all those sorts of things. Wonderful, wonderful things to have. But other things are like flowcharts, cause and effect diagrams, 5 whys. They're all part of the broad array of business best practices and skills. And there are many, many others. So that's what Pan, Newman, and Kavner said back about 7 or 8 years ago. And then there's this statement. And I'm going to say this. Those that believe that Six Sigma is just complex statistics have barely reached the stage of learning, let alone the state of wisdom. And I'm going to accredit that to me and today on this webinar. See how that goes down. Right, benefits of Six Sigma then. Benefits, there'll be cost reduction. There will be defect reduction. Primarily, remember we said about in the lean thing that one of the big drivers was the elimination of defects, driving defects. Six Sigma focuses on helping drive defect reduction. Because of its very nature and its need to be engaging and involving, it should help and will help employee engagement and motivation. Because you're making your products better and more efficiently and more effectively, it will help with market share growth and improve margins. It will also help with customer retention and cycle time reduction. And there's probably many, many more. And I bet there's people out there who are really just saying, it will do this, this, and this as well. So it is a system improvement tool first, but it can be a product improvement tool as well. Because today's challenge is, what I would say to managers is not how do we succeed in what we're doing, it is going to be more about how do we stay successful. And I'm going to bounce over the next slide and go to this one here and actually just talk about what is Six Sigma's mindset, what is it trying to accomplish? Well, the basis behind Six Sigma is it's trying to ensure that all aspects of our process are accurate and precise. So that could be delivery times are accurate and precise. When we promise a customer we will deliver a product, it will be delivered accurately to the time that we said. When we are answering our phone calls in our call centers, if we say that we will open our calls to you within 30 seconds, our customers are expecting that, right? They're not expecting it to be sometimes 30 seconds and sometimes 5 minutes, right? So they're looking for it to be accurate and precise. The Six Sigma challenge, Rich, I'll stop there before I go on. Have you got a question?
Yeah, it does. If you could just drop back, it's actually a question I'm splitting in two. So we'll come on to the first one, first part of it in your summary section. It's a question about flexibility. The slide with the targets on, if you could just jump to that for me.
Oh, sorry, the targets. Yep.
Yep. So where does flexibility fit within this, given the point you made up front about the customer?
Right. That's really great. So that's a very profound question. So thank you for that. But right, flexibility. Let's break our customer requirements up into three different things, should we say? The first thing is, or our business requirements. The first thing is we want to be effective. We want to make sure that we're delivering what the customer wants. So let's take the chart on the top left-hand corner there. The customer wants it in the middle, right? That's fine. So that is effective. We're delivering what the customer wants. From a business point of view, we want to deliver that efficiently. And that's where some of the lean stuff really helps. We can start to deliver that efficiently. What we also want to do, though, is we want to be flexible. We want to be able to change to the customer needs. So if our customer really wants to move to the point on the chart on the right-hand side, I don't want to be in that spot now, I want to be over there, we can move our process quickly. So flexibility is about being quick to respond to the changing demands of the customer. And if you have lean processes, and if you have processes that understand the target of the customer and understand the performance, you can more easily change your aim to what that customer wants.
Mm-hmm. And recognize your ability to meet that requirement.
You can respond to the ever-changing needs of customers and be confident that you can do so without distressing your customer or without distressing yourself. Yeah, which is really quite important things to do.
Cheers, Des. Thanks, Mohammed, for the question. We will come back onto the first part of your question later on.
Thank you. Right. Thank you, Mohammed. That's absolutely brilliant. Those of you that are slightly geekish or slightly technical will recognize this, but I really want to focus on the bottom line on that particular graph, which is what is the principal philosophy behind Six Sigma? And it is that we are on target with minimum variation in everything that we do that is important to either the performance of our business or to the customer. So that could be cycle time, could be lead time, could be delivery times, it could be precision of a particular component, It could be the time that we answer the phone. It could be the time that the patient sees the doctor. It could be how quickly we manage to get medicines out to marketplace, all those sort of things. On target minimum variation is what the Six Sigma challenge is doing. And so I was just going to actually drive over to another point now, which is this is a little model we use over time, and we relate to it in process management and improvement. And what I want you to do as you're looking at this is to think about the lean tools and think about the Six Sigma tools. One of the things we do know from our many years is that if you do not look after your processes, they decay. One way of preventing that decay is through making sure you standardize the processes, train your people to operate to those processes, and then maintain those standards. Both Lean and Six Sigma require that to work. And then for continuous improvement, now let's take the next two steps, so continuous improvement, and then where you see the little icon of the circle. Six Sigma and Lean, when worked in the day-to-day, allow for small improvements, small refinements, small reductions in variation, small reductions in waste, small reductions in time, in cycle time, the observation of the abnormalities. That helps make continuous improvement if you then go back and standardize and maintain again. There may be some cases when you need to actually make a step change, and that's when the Kaizen projects, that's that little graphic you can see there in the Japanese script, you can say, or as you see the improvement project, that's when they come in. But you then need to return that to the day-to-day. You then need to standardize, maintain, and improve. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're a Six Sigma guy or a girl or a lean guy or girl, you will still need to standardize and maintain any improvements you make. It is the very foundation of continual improvement. So that's just something I wanted to stress out. Now, we have the improvement cycle in the Lean Six Sigma. So for those of you familiar again, you'll see on the inner circle here, DMAIC, which is the actual phrase that came out of the Motorola work, and really became famous only after Jack Welch in 1996 put GE onto a footing where everything they were going to do was going to be Six Sigma, and it really became famous at that point. But define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Right. So we want to know which process needs to be improved. How is it performing today? Why is it performing in that way? What can we do about it? Study the results, and how do we make it robust? How do we implement? How do we keep the improvement through standardization, and then learning about the review? Now, one of the things that those of you will know is that there are more tools in Six Sigma than you can shake a stick at. Right? You've got all of those tools around there. And that is one of the things that beguiles many people. They love the tools and the techniques. It is also one of the facets, though, that terrifies many. And it is something I want to draw your attention to. So I've stolen now the work of Leica, and I'm not going to claim the model. I'm just going to build upon it. So Leica said that he believed that these 4 Ps occurred. I'm not going to read through them again. But when you read the problem solving, and the aside words to it, and the people and partners, they are exactly the same for Six Sigma as they are for Lean. The process may change a little bit because we may have define, measure, analyze, improve, control. But the philosophy, the long-term thinking, base management decisions on a long-term philosophy, even at the expense of short-term financial goals. That's one of the things. Now, from my experience, and I think for many of my colleagues, one of the things that we see in Six Sigma is the fascination with the tools. In fact, if you open up many green belt or black belt training programs, the first thing they start off with is Minitab. Now, Minitab is a tool to help you analyze. But really, do you understand the psychology of people? Do you know how to work with people? Do you have the view of how the business will be, how the system will operate? So that's one of the problems that we have. And I would say this, and I've pinched the space into which Leica put his words. And I say the problem, I believe, is that many companies that have embraced Six Sigma tools, but do not understand what makes them work together as part of a system. And there is another little slide which comes from Dilbert. Now, actually, I'm gonna get you to read this one. I'm going to read this one through for you because it actually has a hidden meaning in it. And Dilbert is really funny. So you've got the consultant there. I'm not too sure which of the PMIs that most resembles, but I'm sure we can have a little poll on later. You've got to implement a Six Sigma program or else you're doomed. And to which the chief executive was saying, aren't you the same consultant who sold us the worthless TQM program a few years ago? And the response is, I assure you that this program has a totally different name. And actually, whilst they're joking with that, TQM, Six Sigma and Lean are actually very, very similar in many respects. They have a totally different name. And that might be something you want to. However, I don't agree that they're worthless. So some reflections then from my career and my practice is I was first taught lean concepts. Now I put that down when I first prepared this presentation, and actually then I realized I wasn't actually being entirely truthful. I was first taught industrial engineering concepts. I was first taught the art of being a tailorist or a taylorism of industrial engineering. That probably dates me a tad, but nonetheless, that's what I was first taught. I was then taught lean concepts. Now, those lean concepts, I must admit, when I added them to my industrial engineering background, they helped me greatly. But I was still deeply frustrated by our inability to prevent the continual onslaught from defects and disappointed customers. But because I could do lean, at least I could now produce these defects faster. When I finally better understood the evil of variation, and I mean the evil of variation, and how to correctly analyze data, the lights came on. And it all became so much clearer. I'm going to create a couple of examples for you now, just a couple of examples. I'm going to use one little example just to actually try and embed this in here. Most of you now can see that that's a work balance chart. And every lean practitioner will know the Yamazumi chart or the work balancing chart, and how you calculate takt time and how you then establish the load line. And this is actually a representation of something that actually happened. So I'm just going to actually tell you a truism here. The graphic is different, I have to say. I've made it slightly prettier. But the lean expert took 10 measures and a handful more to actually understand the average cycle time for each of the process steps. They then created the load balance chart, and they did a few of the 5 S's and the 5 R's, sorry, 5 R's. So they removed and they replaced and they reordered. So they did all the things that you would do. So we created this balance chart, and it looks absolutely great. Happy days, as they say. But after 6 weeks, the operators for process step 2 and process step 4 were noticed to be consistently falling behind schedule. Now, let's be clear. That obviously means lazy operators, obviously. So with a little bit of encouragement, our lean practitioners went away and they took over 30 measurements, not only this time to establish the average, but also to establish the variation limits, which is the thing that they were taught when they had their lean Six Sigma element in it. So they went away and they came back. So now they can apply their new knowledge to the load balance chart. And this is what they found. It's not, so now it's not that we've got lazy operators, but that we've got too much variation in the cycle time, obviously. So now we can set about doing something about it. And this is where the concept of lean and Six Sigma are perfect bedfellows. They'll sit together. Understanding and analyzing data doesn't have to be a geek thing. It is absolutely essential that managers understand the data they're dealing with. And some thoughts about this here. So if I look at this one here, why would you improve a process step that does not need to exist? So lean can take a process step away if it's not needed or if it's completely non-value added. So why try to improve it using Six Sigma techniques? But equally, why would you make something go faster that makes defects? The other point I would say is lean requires data. Data has to be correctly analyzed to be of any use. And one of the adages I would like you to take away from this is averages are of no use to management without any understanding of variation. And there's a couple of pictures here that I just want to have. Is that one of the things here is that I'm going to take the one on the left and I'm going to peel back an old phrase, which is this, is that when the only tool you have in your kit bag is a hammer, it's amazing just how many of your problems will look like a nail. But on the picture on the second side, how many times have you seen someone using a hammer to try and bed a screw when actually they should have been using the wrench or a screwdriver? And how many times have you seen someone trying to actually hit in a nail with a wrench when in fact they should have been using a hammer? So you need to have the correct tools, but they need to be used in the right way. But tools are only part of the story. So the foundation of Lean and Six Sigma is Lean and Six Sigma are great bedfellows. They sit shoulder to shoulder and they support each. But both Lean and Six Sigma, they are predicated on the need to have standardization. Without standardization, Lean and Six Sigma are simply concepts that you'll never, ever get to grips with. Standardization is the foundation of both Lean and Six Sigma. The foundation of standardization supporting Lean and Six Sigma has to be made robust by process management, the ongoing standardization, maintaining, improving of every process on a day-by-day basis to continually reduce cost and improve customer satisfaction. So why does Six Sigma and Lean need process management? And it is really this, is any change in Lean or Six Sigma that's made outside the context of a system may not be sustainable, or worse, may sub-optimize the business. So we need to be ensuring that any changes we make in Six Sigma or Lean are focused on improving the business system or helping the business system improve. Process management provides the foundation for continual learning and for improvement. And this point is really very, very key. Tools on their own are not sufficient. There has to be philosophy, there has to be context, and there has to be method, and there has to be means. And that's what the Lean Six Sigma philosophy gives us. So for those of you that think that Lean and Six Sigma are tools, there's a broad band of tools within both of them. Yes, indeed, one can't argue that. But both of them require the robust understanding of standardization and process management. In which case, then they are two sides of the same coin. They are necessary to live together. And we should not be having practitioners who only focus on Lean and practitioners who only focus on Six Sigma, and the two will never agree. They are essential components of the same philosophy. So in summary then, and we're cracking on towards the end here, so if there are any further questions or if there are any notes that you wish to make, then please bring them about. So in summary, we have this. Lean and Six Sigma share the same origins with comparable philosophies and thinking. They go back to the same genesis, effectively. The things people remember are the tools and techniques, though. Now, the purpose of the tools is they allow you to see. They allow you to understand better what is happening. They don't tell you what to do once you have seen. That's your decision. And that's predicated on your thinking and your assumptions. Lean and Six Sigma are a lot more than tools. They're a system of values, beliefs that lead to the change of behavior. The area of greatest significance, though, in Lean and Six Sigma, whilst they're both the same side of the same coin, is that with both methods, they require the total support and involvement of both management and workers to provide the better outcome for all. Rich, that's my last slide.
Cheers, Des. Thank you very much. So if you just drop back to your summary, Des. We've just got a couple of moments for a quick roundup of comments, feedback, and I'd like to put a couple of things to you very quickly, if I may. So lots of advocates for your assertion that tools dominate and mindset often follows. I've pulled that together into a clump.
All right.
One to fire at you here, given a blank sheet of paper, brand new organization, new to improvement, Lean or Six Sigma first? You're on the spot.
Neither. It would be a combination of both.
Great answer. Perfect. Okay, that's fine. I was hoping you'd say that. It was a leading question.
It was, wasn't it? Please ban them from coming back, will you?
One just sneaked in here. Thank you very much, Steve. A comment. Like the way you brought all this together, Des. It's always good. Oh, this one's been planted. It's always good to hear the insights of a seasoned pro. There you go.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Drop me an email. I'll find out.
So you answered the question earlier on, Des, about flexibility. Just finally, on coming back to the start of that process, if you could characterize the two, would it be correct to say, the two approaches, would it be correct to say Lean about efficiency and Six Sigma about effectiveness? Is that right, yes or no?
Actually, that's not an unreasonable preposition to make, because although I think you'd vend them over, but yes, certainly Lean is about speed, velocity in the right direction, and the elimination of waste. So definitely that has a great feel for efficiency, but effectiveness could also be effective because the customer gets their product on time or faster, and that might be something that the customer actually wants, and therefore that could represent being an effectiveness as well. And Six Sigma, yes, one could argue that having everything on target with minimum variation is giving the customer precisely what they want. But what it will also do, it will support, if you've got everything on target minimum variation, you don't have defects, therefore your flow's better. So what I would say is be careful, it's neither one or the other. There's almost an osmosis between the two that you cannot separate, that one will benefit from the other. And it's important to make sure that they both get used.
Cool. Thanks, Des. Thank you very much. And in the last 10 seconds, if you may, if you could just jump forward on the slides. So folks, those of you who've joined us regularly will know we've fully virtualized our training for the public Lean, Six Sigma, Green, Black and Master Black Belt courses. We're providing everyone attending a virtual public course with an iPad, a brand new iPad, which is yours to keep. Find more details on the website at pmi.co.uk/training. And then finally, on the final slide, Des. The schedule is for the rest of the month is up. We've got a couple more to come before the Christmas break. Please do find those details on the site. Look out for the Voice of the Customer survey, and all that remains to say is thank you very much from Des, myself, and from everyone at PMI. And on behalf of everyone, we'd like to wish you a very safe and relaxing weekend. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining us.